There, look, I remember to put the mic on. Well, howdy, friends and floorheads. It is Sunday night. This is 2 nights in a row that I have been doing kind of a flip through look. Yesterday, I did Web World, which has been viewed more times than I anticipated, and I've gotten some nice reactions from it. The creator reached out to me, which I think was awfully nice. And this morning, well, I was waiting for a couple guys to come over that's in my little gaming pod to play our monthly Blades in the Dark game. I was flipping through Itch and came across a game called Stack of Goblins. And the premise is that the players all play a goblin, each play a goblin, and they're stacked together inside of a trench coat. And that I honestly couldn't buy the thing fast enough. It was the PDF was $8. I think it's funded on Itch right now, fully funded, but the campaign is still going. If you look for it on Itch, itch.io if you're not familiar. So I bought it almost sight unseen. It's just the premise alone said, you know what, this is worth $8. I think I gave a $2 tip, $10. And the fun part was, as I flipped through it and started to kind of figure out what the game was, I was pleasantly surprised with this one as well. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I don't know if my bar was real high, but I think that this will find its way to the channel. It definitely will end up finding its way to Camping for Gamers. So let's start. It's by Jack Milton. And she was kind enough to reach out after I tweeted about it, and her and I talked for a little bit. We should have her coming on the podcast for an interview. And of course, keep your eyes to see if we get to play this. All right, let's talk about this. So as you can see, it is classic indie zine, right? You can tell that it is a labor of love. Like Web World, there's some really clever little ideas in here, which is part of the beauty of spending $5 or $10 on a zine made by an independent. Is you generally speaking can find one or two things that are interesting, that even if you don't end up playing, you will. So the tagline is a comedy role-playing game of camaraderie, stupidity, and spite. Now, you'll notice the fonts. I talked about the fonts in Web World. You notice the fonts in here are not standard fonts, but unlike Web World, I was very pleased to find it relatively easy to read this. So I didn't find that the fonts were such that I had to really struggle. All right, so let's get into how we play a stack of goblins. All right, let's go over. Where'd my cursor go? There it goes. All right. Okay, I don't know why it's showing it that way, but that's okay. We can walk through it. So, let's zoom in here. This is not going to work. All right, I apologize. I'm not sure why it's doing this to me. There we go. All right. So, the Goblin Ruler desires things. Their SHENANIGAN-ERIFIC, the Goblin Ruler, has a mighty need, and it's up to you and a couple of friends to see that it is met. The Goblin Ruler pictured here, resting their royal leg upon royal beasties and Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Montesquieu Cronky Bucket, number 17. All right, let's keep going. All right, we got to scroll to the right. Another small little thing. The PDF of this is in layout form, so it's in spread form, which is great for printing. I would love it if she were to also put out the option to buy a single page one. When I'm looking at my e-reader, I much prefer to have single pages, so it'd be great if we had two PDFs, one that had the print-friendly one, which is I appreciate it, but it'd be also great to have one that had it single pages, so it'd be great for an e-reader. So what do you need to play the game? So you need at least 2 goblins, 2 players. You need a D12, a D8, a D10, and then 20 items, preferably pretty ones to use as tokens. So you could use chips, you could use little stones or whatever, but 20 things, right? Could be kind of fun maybe to come up with 20 things around the house, but in the middle of the table, we have 20 different things. The stack of goblins, each player will take the role of a goblin set to retrieve something for the Goblin Ruler and hoping to score something extra for themselves. So you're going to see that these tokens that are in the middle are kind of a timer. And they are also used for other things as well. But this is one of the first things I thought that was interesting about it, was this idea of a timer. All right, so we go over here. The Shenanigan-ERIFIC tools. In order to infiltrate the filthy people places, the goblins must stack upon each other within the ceremonial trench coat of shenanigans, which dictates how they can interact with the world. Of course, goblins are hardly patient or humble, so they will frequently shuffle their positions. None of this would be possible without the most extraordinary goblin technology, the result of many decades of research and development, the crowning glory of goblin kind, the mighty grabby magics. The top goblin gets the privilege of wielding 2 grabby magics, and they are what allow the goblins to create such convincing ruse. So let's say there's 4 players. You're going to decide who is the top goblin, second goblin, third goblin, and the bottom goblin. And you're going to see that there's mechanics that help dictate it as well. So page 5 is a funny little ad for the grabber, but let's go down to page 6. So the first thing that I thought was neat, which is you'll notice the way the stacks work. So the goblin at the top, who's going to be the head, I know, right? It's a great name, isn't it, Donald? The ceremonial trench coat of shenanigans. So your top goblin gets a D12, and that's how they determine and do their checks. The middle goblins are going to all get D10s, and then the bottom goblin gets a D8. And you'll see here that you get to flip around and change positions mechanically is in there. So first thing, which I think is really neat, is the top goblin is obviously going to be the voice, the one that's going to talk to whoever they interact with. Also has the grabbers, so it'll be you'll be using that to grab. It's good they have a D12 because they're going to have probably a lot more checks than everybody else. But what is really clever is the bottom goblin, the feet, has the lowest die of a D8, and is also the GM. So they will determine where you're going. They'll determine what happens when you get there. What do we encounter? What are the challenges and everything? And as you'll see, we can change positions in the stack, which means it's a rotating GM situation, which I think is really, really neat. And with the right table could be just a ship ton of fun. So again, remember our top goblin gets the D12, then a D10, D10, and then D8, and the stack could be obviously as tall as you want it to. And she presents some stacks, some alternate stacks later to accommodate fewer or more players. All right, so somewhat familiar for action rolls. So a little bit PBTA feel to it, but this time, it'll be with a D12, a D10, or a D8. And you have to do a check, right? And on a 1 to 4, you screw up. The action fails to do what is intended and causes a complication. For example, failing to convince the crusty barman to let them into the back rooms till the bouncer is called. Another goblin in the stack can choose to swap places with the goblin that took the action. So if you took the action, you rolled a 1 or 4, then somebody else can take your spot. On a 5 to 8, good enough. The action succeeds but causes some sort of complication as well. For example, the stack is successful in their attempt to climb a tree, but accidentally knock into a beehive in the arms of the passerbys. And keep in mind, the person who's going to come up with the complication or be the voice of the complication will be the person at the bottom of the stack, right? Because they're the GM. Though I would imagine it'd be very much a collaborative, almost storyteller type environment. And then at a 9 or above, the goblin succeeds, keeping in mind that your GM only has a D8. So it is impossible if the GM at the bottom of the stack has to do a check. It's impossible for them to have a clean success. The action goes off without a hitch and happens as the goblin intended. So there's the checks. All right, let's go over here. Here's the shuffling. During the operation, the goblins will frequently shuffle around within the stack. Where they are in the stack at any given moment will affect what dice they use and what role they fulfill. Goblins do the shuffling when one goblin rows a screw up and another goblin chooses to replace them. If multiples want to fight for the position, roll off against each other, highest die wins, remembering that not everybody has the same die. A goblin removes a token from the pool to force their way into the position of choice. So here's the first thing where we're seeing those 20 tokens in the middle of the table being used, is someone can take one of those tokens off the table and force a reshuffling. And then to the right here, you can see the different ways to shuffle depending on where the starting point is and who moves to where. And then we got a nice picture of our trench coat of shenanigans. All right, so now we kind of get into this timer idea and how the game kind of uses these tokens. Obliviousness. Obviously, no operation is perfect, and your actions may arouse suspicion among the peoples. As they get less oblivious to your activities, they may begin to oppose your goals. Real quick, one thing that's not clear in here, and I like this, is exactly what the setting is, right? Is this medieval? Is it modern? And there's a couple hints in the tables that you'll see we get to, but I think that she maybe have purposely not dictated the time or place of their setting, because I think it'd be fun to do it in a fantasy world, in a sci-fi world, or, in a modern world. The amount of tokens left is the maximum a die roll result can be. So as these 20 go down, if you end up with only 11 left, that means even the person with the D12 can't roll higher than 11. If you end up with 5 left in the middle, that means the highest roll is a 5, which means if I get down to 4 tokens, then every roll is going to fail, right? Because the highest I can do is a 4, and a 1, 2, 3, or 4 is a screw up. This means that the game progresses, you will become less likely and able to succeed at rolls without working together. When the tokens dwindle, the game draws to a close, and we'll cover that in a second. That's the timer for the game itself. You remove a token from the pool when any of the following happens. A goblin makes someone else's day materially worse. So if you make someone's day worse, you remove a token. Or if a goblin successfully acquires any of their desires. So removing tokens in this case is a good thing, right? Goblins want to make life hard for everybody, and they want to collect things. They're out there to get stuff. So the reduction will potentially hamper your maximum rolls, but it's also what we're driving to, right? As we are acquiring our stuff in our trench coat, we are taking tokens off the board, which is, again, you'll see here when we get to page 17, is also our timer. Also, goblins can remove a token to get one of the following effects. Get a goblin's success on an action regardless of the roll result. So, I have a critical roll, and I roll it, and it's a 4, and we all decide, or I decide that, hey, we've got to succeed on this check, so let's take one of our tokens off the table, and it's automatically a success, and now our token count goes down. Or to force a swap with another goblin, right? So if I want to force myself up to the top or to the bottom or into the middle, I can take a token off and I can make that happen. All right. So, a way to personalize your goblin. Your goblins have no stats. There's no character sheets or anything, which I think is fun. But you can kind of generate for each goblin. You can generate something that's fun. So you can do this either pick on the list, or it's a D10 table. So I think rolling on it would be fun. Wild talks to weeds, throws voice, night vision, soaks up water, makes stuff good. Power electronics, powerful punches, can smell shapes, bigger than most, and predict the weather. It's just wonderful silliness, which, is definitely in the spirit of the game. So we got to figure out what the Goblin King or ruler sent us out to do, but a really small thing that made me laugh out loud when I read it the first time. It says, what is it that the Goblin ruler wanted? And in parentheses, you weren't listening, which I love. Oh, you know what? Brian, I'm not familiar. So Brian says, reminds me a bit of Og, the caveman RPG. I'm going to have to check that out. I've never heard of it before. Is it a similar type thing? Kind of a small press zine type stuff? I'll connect with you later, Brian, and we can talk about it. So a barrel of ale, a single 20-sided die, a new court jester, a fine artisan avocado burger, a magic weapon. Oh, that's clever. So Brian says it's great. You know a handful of words and that's all you can use to communicate. Ooh, I like that idea. Now you'll notice in this table, like we've got a court jester, right, which gives some implication of a timing, a magic weapon, a 20-sided die, a potion. Number 8 is 3 whole cats, a golden goose. So these are the things. This is what they want. Oh, this is what the king wants. Again, it kind of hints at maybe a fantasy setting, but yet we have a 20-sided die. We have a fine artisan avocado burger. So I really think we can play around with, where this is set. And maybe start off with whoever's on the bottom, the GM. The GM just kind of does it, and then you build the world as you go. I think there's a lot of options here. And then what do you desire? So you're trying to get 2 things. Each goblin's trying to get 2 things. The goblin's trying to get something for the ruler and something for themselves. What do you desire? A book with lots of pictures in it, a single 20-sided die, to ride a goat home in triumph, for daddy to notice you, a sack of ferrets, a mimic, 18 blocks of cheese, one of those glass things, the ones, someone else's hat, and a dagger that glows when goblins are near it. So all of these are fun. They're very evocative. Anybody who follows me knows I get a kick out of a good random table, and this is definitely a good random table. All right. So now the mission, the details of the mission, must be decided on as a group. Again, we can pick one or can roll a D10. So a mysteriously grumpy fishing town. What is the setting? Where are you going? The world's largest library. A dire hamlet carved from the foetid carcass of a long dead god. The royal palace. So we're starting to get kind of a fantasy feel to this. A precarious and rickety canyon mine, a mushroom city in the forest elves, a transcontinental rail locomotive. So now we've broken that. But again, maybe the setting changes based on the mission, right? Maybe that's part of what you determine the setting is going to be: the big city, a university campus, or a deep, dark dungeon. So that's going to be where we're going. How are you getting out? A goblin blimp, riding shopping carts downhill, riding ill-tempered steeds, scuba expedition, clinging to the outside of a train, hiding in boxes or crates, catapult, rickety raft ride, experimental goblin tank, and just leg it. And then down below, you have what's happening there. So this is going to be the complication of the mission, right? Villain henchman recruit drive, a speed dating event's happening there, mimic invasion. There's all kinds of options. But with a couple rolls, we'll kind of lay out what the mission's going to be. All right, the loot. Of course, the goal of shenanigans is to collect loot. Each goblin should be aiming to collect 2 items. Like I said, one for the goblin ruler and one for themselves. That gives a little bit of direction on, being creative around it. There's some interesting rules about the ability to toss loot to potentially get more tokens back, right? If you want the timer to go longer. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's clever. It's a cute idea. And once again, we see how encumbrance should be handled. This is very narratively speaking. So the escape. This is how the game ends, right? When the amount of obliviousness tokens drops to be equal to the amount of goblins in the stack, it is time to make your escape. So when that 20 token timer gets down to 4, if you have 4 players, 5 if you have 5 players, each goblin takes 1 token, which can be spent to get a goblin success on a single action. So when in the middle, when we've got just enough tokens for everybody to take 1, everybody takes 1. And that token can be used once to create an automatic success. Then it says, retracing their steps through the people place, the stack must contend with peoples that they have interacted with and the situations that they've played out during the game in order to get away. So you kind of retrace your steps to escape. If no goblin tokens left, or no goblin wants to spend a token on an action, then the top goblin must choose 1 piece of loot to toss. So if you run out of tokens and you got to throw out some of your loot, the owner of the tossed item then takes the place of the top goblin. Once the stack is made, it's back to their original starting point. They can escape. It's expected that they will have lost several pieces of loot on the way. So tons of fun as you're getting out. All right, we are almost done. There's a couple neat little rules twists in here that adds a couple little layers to it if you want to add some layers to it. Part of them is, changing the number of tokens to kind of dictate how long the game is, because that's your timer. Here is potential other stacks that you can use depending on the number of players that you want. And then a key at the bottom reminding you the D12s, the D10s, and what each goblin in the stack does. And then the grand finale, the last page, the back page, it tells you this is the back page. There isn't much useful here. You probably want a different page, silly peoples. This is put out by Cobblepath Games. Now, Cobblepath Games has a couple other games that Jack has been a part of as well. There's a horror game, which I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It begins with an L, I want to say. That I've had my eyeballs on. I haven't bought it yet. I probably will. I think I'd want it in print because it's not just a small zine. It's a little bit beefier. And it's interesting, and I'm a sucker for horror games. So seeing how clever she is with this game, this was $10 well spent. I think it would be a fun game, again, with the right people. Teach it immediately. The concept is something that we all get, especially people who have read any type of level of fantasy. So once again, it is Stacks of Goblins, and I am anxious to give it a run. So Jack, I don't know if you're watching, but well done. And Cobblepath Games, this is not the last thing I'm going to buy from you, because for my first purchase from you, I'm very, very impressed. All right, it was good seeing everybody in chat. Go by itch.io. Locus, that's it. Thank you, Donald. Yeah, Locus is the name of the game. And I'm sure I'll let you know here on the channel when I get it. But when you go over to Itch and go to Cobblepath Games, check out Locus. It also looks very interesting. It's a much different game than this, a much deeper game than this, or more layered, I would say, than deeper. But it's definitely piqued my horror interest. All right, it was good seeing everybody. Like, subscribe, and everything. Do me a favor, though. Go to Cobblepath Games or go to their Itch store and check it out. They've got some really interesting stuff there. Support your independent creators out there. If you don't have an account at Itch, just get one. There's an unbelievable number of free games out there. There's cheap games out there. And the innovation that's happening in this industry right now is happening on Itch. And some of the games that you love started there and were fostered there and initially funded there. So, all right, good seeing everybody.